I just got to the park and it looks like the birds are gone. I was here yesterday and they were trying to capture them. And I think there were 4 left. There were 4 or there was 4? I really don't know how to use was and were. But anyway, and then I just walked over here and I found a key. It's a sign from the universe. I have the key to unlock the universe. I'll just leave it there in case somebody's looking for it, but if I was really manic, I would take it, probably put it on my necklace, but I'm not. And yeah, it's been an interesting couple of days. I was super tired yesterday. So first thing I want to talk about today is how I now do have a ticket to the event with the spiritual master I studied with 10 years ago when he was here last. He's from Malaysia. And I guess somebody else, one person who I met there, who probably doesn't remember me, they emailed me and said, oh, there's no tickets. You can be 20th in line for cancellation, so it's not likely that you'll get a ticket. And then somebody else emailed me and said, oh, I'm going to forward your email to that same person that already emailed me. And I said, oh, they already emailed me and said there's no ticket. And I wrote a bit of a blurb about my struggles and said some of the stuff I remember experiencing with this enlightened master years ago, and that I did, the Discipline 1 class of his in person years ago. And I guess I had mentioned I listened to a recent talk on his online portal thing. And so I just got an email saying, oh, we had a cancellation for the public talk, and since you've done Discipline 1 and listened to talks, we're going to give it to you. So, I just bumped myself up from 20th to 1st, and here I was thinking that I wasn't going to be able to go. And I have to work some stuff out with my schedule to be able to go. But now that I have a ticket, I'm going to try to go no matter what. Just to say sort of thank you. It's like this 10-year cycle coming to completion in a way. And years ago when this craziness was all happening, before I was diagnosed, I was talking with him in the online portal. It's kind of like his own little social portal thing. And he was saying, oh, this could be an awakening experience. And he said different things like, don't push, let it come to you, blah, blah, blah. So he was trying to sort of coach me through it, but I fell into this whole mental health paradigm. And I don't think that was not supposed to happen. I think it was supposed to happen. So then I can learn how to help other people who have their awakening process pathologized and help them get back to the process of awakening. Because it takes often a lot of pain and suffering before one realizes that one has to awaken, or before awakening happens. It's like, I can't take any more of this life that I'm living, and a different energy starts to come in. It's really complicated. I've been talking to myself about it for years, but point being, he was talking with me for the 2 months before I was hospitalized and sort of trying to help me, but I totally fell out of it. And then I just went through the mental health paradigm, and I did try to contact him years later, but he didn't reply. So I just figured, oh, well, he left me to my own devices. And I remember him saying too, don't make me into a person. So whatever this whole master thing is, it's not really, I don't think it's a person. It's like meeting the universe. The universe is the teacher and, the quote master. And I wouldn't even say it's a person or a thing. It's sort of the algorithm of mastery and self-mastery and mastering the universe. So and over the years I've checked in on his portal thing and seen like him say things that make it seem like he doesn't have it all figured out either. And when I was talking to him, he's like, yeah, that happens to me too. I haven't figured that out. So he was talking from a level of shoulder to shoulder, or like, yeah, we're kind of dealing with the same craziness here, and we haven't really figured it out. So anyway, it seems like I will be able to go see him, talk, and meet him. I could have done this thing where I did this other online course and then stayed and did an in-person retreat with him. But I'll be off to California, and I don't want to delay that. And plus, it was, you know, it's expensive, and I'm not against that per se, but for me, my path is more about creating my own dreams and not necessarily listening to an authority. I think sometimes there's an authority that contacts me and is the author of the words that I say. So I think I'm integrating the same thing that he has, but he's been at it for probably like 30 or 40 years, and I've been at it for 7. Probably 30 years for him, but so it's more like approaching him as a friend, as an equal. I remember him even saying that, like, one day we'll meet as friends. And I understand that. So it's hard to get into what I understand of that whole thing, but it's cool that now I will have an opportunity to meet him and say hi and thank you and all of that. And then I'll be off. That's on the 11th. And then I'll be off to California. So it's awesome. This morning I was thinking, oh, maybe I wrote kind of stupid stuff in that email, because I kind of was like, I think I'm one of the fallen ones that doesn't really deserve or isn't able to resonate with his teachings, because in his recent talks he says, like, he's going to help certain people that he thinks he can help, but not everyone. And he said he's going to start being a little bit more like harsh to like see if we can not react or be hurt or whatever. So anyway, I don't know if I'm necessarily one of his people, but I feel like he did do something to play a role in initiating me into that craziness. Because I did have an experience when I was in the crazy experience for the 2 months before I was diagnosed, hospitalized, pathologized. I remember trying to sleep and then waking up, and I could hear him talking to me, like I was listening to music. It felt like it was coming through the speakers or something. And I was like kind of scared and crying, but I don't remember a word he said, but I remember very clearly I heard him say my name. There was a wasp. I heard him say my name, and then he was saying something. But, that could be like a delusion or something, but I'm just trying to say that he was partly a part of that process. And I was listening to a recent talk by him online, and he was talking about uncaused celebration. And I really think that that's what mania is. It's celebration without a cause. And that's why people start to think we're kind of crazy, is because they feel like we need a specific reason to be that happy. And those reasons would be within the realm of the societal constructs of what should make a person happy, which is usually some point in the future. So the last thing I want to say about what Dion Vimal said about something in his talk on Uncaused Celebration, just a little snippet of what he said really caught my attention. It was near the end of the talk, and he said, I don't know if this is my geniusness or my madness. I just need one song and I can see 1,001,000,000 things in it. When I read, that's how it is. When I hit one thing, I realize 1,000 things. You guys, you read the thing and the next day you think, did I read that? There's a big difference between you and me, man. In you, it didn't even record. And I might say the word register instead of record, because we don't really need to record it as much as register it. But anyway, my point being, this is what happens to me all the time, and why I've had to limit my information intake over time, because I read something and I see so much in that one little thing. And that's likely holographic. So that's all about that for now. Point being that in that mode of perception, one gets a lot more information out of what one really perceives, which is an insight. So an insight is that more information, whereas thought is like a 1-to-1 ratio. And yesterday I was so tired. It's the most tired I've ever been in months. And it happened because I took half a Zopicone because I wanted to sleep better, because I didn't sleep the greatest on Thursday night or Wednesday night. I can't remember about Saturday, but I didn't quite get enough sleep on Saturday. So I took half a Zopicone to sort of knock myself out. But then I only slept 9 hours. I set my alarm because I wanted to get up, go for breakfast with somebody. And after that, I did a bit of a walk at this park with them, and then I was so tired I couldn't do anything. So I just laid around and watched Downton Abbey, which was fine. And then, because I was so tired, I went to bed at 9. I usually go to bed between 11 and midnight. So I went to bed at 9, and I woke up at 9:30. So I slept over 12 hours, or about 12 hours, which makes me feel like I've had enough sleep when I take those meds. Otherwise, the meds are still sort of doing their thing and making me sleepy, and I haven't had a full night's sleep. So that's good to know. And I shouldn't have to wake up early too much in September anyway. But also yesterday, I didn't have any coffee or caffeine, except maybe a bag of Yorkshire tea. And then I didn't take tyrosine, I didn't take DLPA, I didn't take SAMe, I didn't take methylfolate. So today, I took all of those, and because I sort of had my tired day and did the tired thing, and today I'm amping it up again, because I think a lot of creativity does sort of burn out the brain and make the body tired. It's almost like so much energy is put into creativity that the body kind of runs out of energy. So it's good to know that I can fluctuate these different supplements and have a certain effect. And when I see my doctor, I'm going to see if I can get more Zopicone, because I heard about somebody who's been taking it for years. So if I only have to take half or a quarter every night for a while, that's not so bad. So I might just ask for enough to get me through for a while longer. And so I'm feeling pretty caught up in general. I need to study for facilitating this month, and there's one thing I need to write a summary of that I was supposed to do a long time ago, and sell my old car and get ready to go, like buy health insurance and get some US dollars and figure out the SIM card thing and stuff like that. So yeah, I feel like with the week by myself, I was able to get some of the talking out of my system, and really a lot of this month is going to be practical and getting ready to go. And that's fun, to get ready to go. Like, it feels like soon I'll be on my way. So that should be relatively fun. It's all objective sort of stuff. And I've had a few insights into a little bit of a different way of looking at some of this. And I might have talked to myself about it at some point, but maybe not exactly like this. And I'll talk more about it sitting down and looking at my notes. But for now, I was realizing in a way that when one goes into an altered state of consciousness, there's a lot of energy coming into the system, like the human system, whether it's biological, psychological, consciousness, whatever. It's a lot of energy. And I've talked to myself a lot in the past about how it seems like this energy is helping to grow new brain cells or change the way the brain works to make it more neurofluid as opposed to neuroplastic. Plastic means like I might change my repetitive thoughts from one set of content to another and create these new neural tracks. But the fluidity is like the brain changes every microsecond to adapt to fully contacting this moment. The neuroplastic tracks, those still prevent us from contacting the moment because those are based on the self and self-consciousness. So it's putting the energy into self-consciousness, which makes us feel like we're divided and a separate observer. We don't feel like we're a participatory observer. And so I was realizing that this would require some kind of fat metabolism because the brain is mostly fat. And I was thinking about how, if we're fully perceiving in the moment, like the light coming into our eyes and in direct contact, that will change the brain in terms of fully perceiving the moment. But if we're not, like if we're looking at the scenery, absorbing it fully, that changes the brain fluidly. But if we're looking down, it's almost like a neuro-linguistic programming, where if we're in the moment, but we're looking at the self in terms of the neural tracks of thought, we're not in contact with the moment. So when we're not in contact with the moment, we're not able to accept the fuel and the energizing quality of directly perceiving the moment. So we're stuck in these habitual thoughts we're not perceiving. So like, where's that energy going? It's not going into growing the brain cells to be in contact with the moment, because the brain is somewhere else in thoughts about the self. So then I realized if this perception of the moment, the light, the energy and the vibration and the interference patterns of the hologram of the actual moment touch the brain cells, that interference pattern would match the patterns that are going on in the brain. And since each moment is so different and new, like each step we take, each moment we live and breathe, there's so much more information, so much new information. Of course, unless we're sort of letting the brain fill in the patterns, which we like to do when we're lost in thought. And that's partly where we get a lot of the energy from, is the brain stops filling in patterns because it's not lost to the moment. If we're lost in our personal thoughts and self-thoughts, our self-consciousness, the brain naturally has to fill all this in, and we're not really in contact with it. But we can be more in contact with it. And when we are, that's when we can notice the beauty of it. Of course, we can't notice the beauty of it when we're lost in thoughts of self-consciousness. So, perceiving the moment, having one's full peripheral vision capacity available, because the focal point of the eyes isn't changing because we're lost in thought. Like, you can literally think of being lost in self-consciousness as like eyes always turned up and we're not really looking, or possibly eyes pointed down. And the way we change our eyes, they talk about neuro-linguistic programming, but there could be part of that where it's, neuroperceptive unprogramming. Not programming a self, but perceiving the moment, the beauty of the moment. But anyway, perceiving the moment actually as it is, in full view. It feels kind of like 3D. It feels strange. It is 3D, but when we perceive the moment, that has something to do with fat metabolism in the brain. And I think part of what happens is there's so much energy in these upper chakras, and it's going into creating and changing the brain. That's part of what happens in altered states of consciousness. The brain changes the way it perceives. So what I'm trying to get at is that I was seeing that a possible mechanism of psychopharmaceuticals and tranquilizers and things is that it lowers the energy, or it shunts the energy to the lower chakras of like living in survival, which is most of the programming of how we're raised, to live to survive, not to thrive and be creative and have uncaused celebration. So what happens is the medications act as sort of a shunt, to shunt the energy from going into the brain and the fat metabolism needed for neurofluidity, to literally that energy gets translated into fat on the body, because it has something to do with fat metabolism. Fat in the brain, good fats and the brain doing all the good fatty things that it does. Or people literally can gain 50 pounds in a month. Now, how is that possible when they're not necessarily taking in that much energy of food? They probably are taking in a bit more for sure, but not enough to really put all that weight on. Like, where are all those calories coming from? Where is all that energy coming from? Well, one could realize that if one has gotten in contact with this extra energy of the universe that is trying to energize a fat metabolism in the brain to change the way the brain operates based on the light of perception in the moment versus the projection of repetitive thoughts and sounds that keep us living in a habit. So when that happens, that energy goes to the fat of the body as the extra energy of the universe. And the energy that is created when the light of perception meets the light of the moment. It's C squared. One of the C's is the light of the sun. The other C is our light. Meeting that light. We are a light, and there's the light of the sun that created our light. But to me, I've never seen it that way, that's part of what happens, is all that extra energy that's going into perception of the moment that would lead us to create a new world and a new way of life. It gets stored as fat. And part of the reason it gets stored as fat is because we don't know how to share that energy. And so sharing the energy is the energy of the light of perception of the moment creates insight, new thought, new memes. If it's a new moment, we can get new information. And the thing is, if we're trying to store it to our memory, like remember it, instead of sharing it, if the brain is working based on this storing information algorithm, then that information, when it's shunted by the tranquilizers, gets stored as information in the body like fat cells. Because one thing I notice is when I shift into the energy being shunted back into the brain, I get slimmer, because the energy of the fat on my body kind of is storage for that. It's not storage for the energy of survival, but the energy of those memes. And that's partly why I feel that we're kind of seeds for that new way of looking and living and perceiving and acting. But when we're not able to live that way, we're still seeds of that, and we have this layer of fat, kind of like seeds do too. They have fat and protein, and they're like a seed of a beautiful flower, and the seed in no way reflects what the beautiful flower looks like. So people, they become like seeds in this frozen, preserved state, and when the conditions are right, they can begin to manifest as the flowering of human consciousness. So, in a way, if a person goes on meds and gains weight, that fat energy isn't necessarily for when there's no food, but it's for when it's stored so that brain can use that energy when it comes to mimetic sharing and sharing one consciousness. But I feel that if we don't store, if we try to forget instead of remember, that could help with the whole weight problem a little bit. I don't know if any of this is making sense, but it seems too that the tranquilizers divert the energy into the lower chakras, like down to especially the navel chakra, I think, the one that's about food. So all of it goes into I'm hungry and whatever, and then it makes the body a lot fatter than the calories taken in. You know, there's energy in calories, or there's energy from food, but there's also energy in the universe, and there's energy from perception. And the thing that's kind of symbolic from you know, when there's this energy of the light of perception, we can literally run. We're so strong, and we usually get quite slim. Well, at least I did. But then when the tranks come in and that energy gets diverted to the body, it like slowly, literally makes it turn into molasses, and it slows it down. So it's slowed down physically as well as perceptively. So I also thought of something else that's sort of a metaphor in a way, is that thought is kind of like an electric fence. So human action and human consciousness is conditioned by thought and as thought. And it keeps us in this sort of very small, limited world of the self, projecting, self-fulfilling, kind of. And when we step outside of that in mania, and if we go too far into it, we literally get to a point where we get a shock. And then when we get that shock, we retreat. And usually for me, that shock is felt as fear, like in the heart. And that fear makes me retract and go backwards into thought. You know, like the brain thinks, oh, I could take a med or something. That is part of conditioning of thought. I've been conditioned to do that. And it could be good conditioning for now. But it does seem like it's kind of like an electromagnetic fence. And it's really hard to get out of this electromagnetic fence, prison of the self. And yesterday I was talking for a while, or the day before, and I didn't realize that I'd left the screen recording on from screen recording sweat coin. And then when I was recording, it was the first time I tried to record like this. And since I did that, I didn't notice that it was still screen recording. I didn't actually record myself. It's funny. I went into the app to record myself by pressing record. But since the screen was recording, it actually just recorded the screen recording and not me. So there was no sound, is what I'm trying to say, because it was recording the screen. And so I didn't even notice that the screen was recording. And there could be some kind of weird metaphor in that. We don't realize that the self, which is like a screen, is recording everything, and we're living in that recording without knowing it. Whereas like the camera recording would be more like actuality in a way. So the screen is part of the brain cells, and it puts up a screen in between us and actuality, and it's sort of recording and projecting old recordings of the past. So it didn't capture the sound of what I was talking about with sweat coin, which I don't really think is going to add up to that much at this point, but it's cool that some things are creating those types of algorithms. I was trying to say that there could be an algorithm one day in technology to help us. Like it would know if we said something that wasn't great or behaved in a certain gesture that wasn't ideal or something. I was saying a lot more, but it didn't get recorded, so oh well. But point being, one can get a little bit of money for wandering because it counts steps and then converts that into some kind of cryptocurrency or some kind of currency that one day might have monetary value. Right now it doesn't. And I'm thinking that it won't really add up to that much. But if there are other things like that, it could start to add up. So it's making me hopeful that technology could help us wander. And I don't remember if I said this, but it came to me the other day that with these types of things, with this ability to wander, make money literally by walking in a park, it could happen that one day property has no value, like personal property as in land with a house on it. I was thinking that it'd be interesting if there were like places to sleep, like big dorm buildings that one could sleep in, and then during the day one just goes out and wanders, goes to the different businesses, goes to whatever. So if one doesn't have to pay $1,000 or $2,000 a month for a huge mortgage of land, then think of all the money that is freed up for wandering and creating new experiences. Like we assume this little plot of an acre or less of land with a big house on it has value, but it's possible that one day it really won't. When we think about it, we can wander almost anywhere in the world, and then we say we own this one little piece with this dwelling on it, but really it becomes like a decorated prison cell. So I think it'd be cool to create some dorms or something. And there are already things like this, like Airbnb and couch surfing, things like that. Craigslist that would help people wander. I guess for me, it's about starting to wander more, and that's kind of what I'm going to be doing. And I bought those puppets. I kept the dinosaur and the hummingbird, and I had some little visitors, and it's funny, they picked those things out of my space and played with them all night practically. And there were so many other things to pick from, but they picked out the thing that was new and played with it. So I'm glad I kept them, because there was some playfulness from it. And that was the other thing. when I had that 10-minute clip of me talking but no audio, I was thinking about listening to some of the old audios that I had from before I was diagnosed. And I have it in a folder called Manic Babble, because I was really babbling. And so in order to put it in the video, I listened to it because I wanted to hear what it was. And I clipped out the names, because I was talking about people, clipped out the names and left the rest of it. And it's interesting because I can see the vision that I still have mixed in with it, but what sounds really different from now is that I'm not trying to create a meaningful story out of it, or the story that I'm creating or wondering about isn't only about me, because that was kind of like, well, this happened and this person gave me this and that means this and blah 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 blah, and I was talking really fast and making all these associations to the self, to me, which I don't do anymore really. At least I don't do it in a really connected way. Like I saw that key today, I'm like, oh look, it's a key to the universe, but I'm not saying, well, since I found this key and yesterday I saw there were no batteries in this device and blah 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 blah, like making a story about me. So now I realize there is no me. So the story is really about all of humanity and wandering. So I think I've never listened to that. I've never listened to that since that time. It was before I was hospitalized, which was March 15th, 2011. And this first audio I put in was, May 15th, 2011. I don't know if I said May or March. And the audio was from March 26th. And I think that state had been going on for a while before I started recording myself talking. So it was kind of interesting to listen to because it points to the difference between now and then, and there's similarities, but there are also differences in that I'm not trying to make a story out of myself. Now, not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think it was always like relating the past moment to other past moments, whereas the story that I would create now would be by living life and having the story in the moment to moment, as opposed to like thinking back. So in order to be creative, one has to forget about the last moment and keep going. It's not like we can stop going, just it's a movement of life. So yeah, it would be the difference between retrospecting and making it into a story of the personal self versus walking. This is a story, walking through the forest and being able to create new words. So I'm not making the word energy into words about the self and storing them in memory to compare them to the next moment. So I think it shows the process of the brain changing and not creating more story of the self, like making the self something meaningful to make a story about. Now I don't see it that way. I see forgetting as more important than remembering, and there's still a lot of meaning and insights, but it has nothing to do with making a story about me. And maybe one day I'll feel like making a story about this story or something, but it would mainly only be worth telling if other people thought so. Not using thought energy to create this story moment to moment. Like the self has no meaning. And so I was using a lot of that energy to attribute meaning to the self and the story of me and what's happening to me in this continuity. And by doing that with that energy, the self eventually explodes. So it is part of the mechanism. And once the brain learns to not put energy into that self-story making, then any type of crisis, energetic crisis, isn't really felt to be about the self. So there's no self to get depressed. There's no self to get manic. It's a human organism moving through space and time. I don't know where I am now. So it was interesting to listen to and get a sense of the difference. It's the first time listening to that in over 7 years, and I can see the difference of being like, well, I saw this stick and that stick, so part of that was synchronicity. But again, the synchronicity was being used in service of the story of a personal self that's not there. So if all that energy goes into something that's not there, that's not real, it's blowing up that unreality. So eventually it's seen as not real. Sometimes it's there invisibly, but there's again no movement of like and dislike, which is movement of the self. So any energy that doesn't go towards the movement of the self is kept within the realm of the movement of life itself. It's like we're not this separate self. We are life itself. So from self to life itself. Like this whole movement of being here now isn't some kind of separate thing. Oh, so I didn't talk about this other thing that I wrote down today. This is a bit of a complex one, but I realized I've been thinking or having this question in mind about why is science measurement? And David Bohm brings this up in one of his videos on YouTube where he's talking to people in a conference. He says there's no reason why science should be measurement, but it is. We measure things in order to see if they are repeatable and predictable. So if they're repeatable, we can predict with it. If it's not repeatable, we can't use it for prediction, which is, so things that are repeatable we can use. Now this is the new thing that I saw today involved in this, is that it came to mind that there's the placebo effect, and that can happen when a person knows what one thing is supposed to do. Like one takes a sugar pill and thinks it's a pill for the heart, and one gets better. And I would say that's because of perception. Perception itself has an action, and then it's involved in the material process of taking the pill. So there's a material part, but there's also a perceptual part. So then I'm thinking to myself, or something came to mind, where when they do science, the gold standard is a double-blind, placebo-controlled. And I was realizing that double-blind means no perception involved on the part of the scientists, because if there's perception of what group is what, it will influence the outcome, because perception itself has a biological effect without even the molecules involved. So double-blind, placebo meaning taking some kind of inert substance that doesn't have the medical biological ingredient, or whatever kind of trial. It doesn't always have to be like a medical trial. But the scientists in the group, they're all blind, double blind, until the results at the end. So there's no attention being paid when the experiment's going on to, like, there's no observer. So one could think of it as there's no camera in the double slit experiment making it into a particle or material. It's kind of like keeping it as a wave because nobody's looking. So what I realized is that if one really thinks about it, when we're lost in thought, we're not being attentive to the moment now. The mind isn't actually looking, or we're looking through thought, which influences the moment. But what I realized is, like, why would they want to know what's going on when nobody's looking? Because, like, when one is looking, when one is paying attention, moment to moment, those experiments wouldn't work. What they're trying to see is what goes on when nobody's paying attention. So if the world can be in such a way that it diverts our attention to whatever, distracting us. If we're distracted, we're not looking at the experiment of the moment. It's, the world is unfolding in a double blind. And then this makes sense as to why people who are really attentive and really present and really watching each moment are not affected in the same way by scientific thought. Anything that's created by scientific thought. Most things that are involved in scientific thought, or most of the scientific thought that's created, is when nobody's looking. And if we're lost in thoughts of the self, that isn't a real structure. The self, which is nobody, is looking. And when nobody is looking, when thought is looking, we're affected by all of these scientific things. Because those experiments are done when nobody's paying attention. But the thing is that when one works towards being attentive, moment to moment, those scientific things, they don't work. So one can literally be completely immune to, scientific thought, or like things they say are toxic, or whatever. We're immune to the words that are created in a double blind. The universe isn't blind. And then when we're looking at the universe with the universe moment to moment, the scientific thought doesn't apply. And when we're doing that enough, we get into a different type of energetics that has nothing to do with material cause and effect. Material cause and effect is sort of a Newtonian scientific viewpoint. And when they're looking at things in terms of a double blind, they're trying to see what Newtonian things happen when nobody's paying attention. And not paying attention is the same as thinking. So, like, why do they want to create science in terms of repetition and prediction? Because that's the only way control can happen. So if we're paying attention, we can't be controlled, because it's not repetition, and it's not a reflex of memory. So when one is fully paying attention in the moment, it's co-creative with the universe, which is something new, which can't be predicted or repeated. So yeah, it seems pretty messed up. And that's why one can say, no, that won't affect me or life itself. So none of that can affect life itself. And the people who are really aware moment to moment don't get lost in those scientific structures of repetition and, projection and repetition and prediction. So in a way, like, when the media puts out some kind of mass fear-based thing, they can predict how we'll react because they've conditioned us. And we don't realize that thought that's been conditioned is repetition, projection, and thus prediction. Thus we act predictably and we can be controlled. So when you think about so-called mental health crisis, it's because they can't predict what we're going to do. We can't even predict it, and then we feel out of control. But we are out of control. We're out of the control of the whole big systemic conditioned structure of thought, which is a field of energy that we're all immersed in. It's like an electromagnetic force field, and when we move too far outside of that, we get the shock. We get the shock that there's nobody in control. There's no controller. And we're unpredictable and we're spontaneous. Spontaneous means we don't even know what we're going to do ourselves. So we need to learn this art of spontaneity. Krishnamurti would call it the unpremeditated art. It's the art of unpremeditation. All premeditation is part of the structure of thought, and that premeditation is what makes projection and predictability. We become so predictable. And then we have the same kind of psychological structure where we're trying to predict what other people are thinking. And if we can predict that, we can premeditate how to act next. So we need a kind of science of spontaneity. The science of unpremeditation. Thought is premeditation. So, when we're in a state of so-called mania, we're really in a different algorithm of the brain that is spontaneous, acts right in the moment now, and learning that art, which could be knowing when it's safe to be spontaneous. So spontaneity requires forgetting all of our premeditative actions, all the actions we sort of planned out, all of our habits. So I really liked Steve Pavlina's deep dive into abundance, but I feel like I still apply things that he said to, my own way of looking at things, which is just a different path. One of being thrust into the other brain algorithm and then learning the art of that in a way. So he is a lot about habits and sometimes routine or building character of the self and things like that. When I don't know if it's quite that way. I was talking to somebody about how we exist in relationship. He was asking, am I the same person who I was when I was 12? 20 years later, am I still the same person? So I asked, well, what's a person? And where is this person? And then also, are you the same person when you're at work or with your friend or with a boss or with a kid, like, where is this person? And like, why are we trying to think in terms of, am I the same person? I don't take myself to be a person at all, though I'm sure it still remains somewhat. So it's about relationship. Right now, when I'm by myself, I consider myself to be in relationship with the universe. And that's why I like when Steve talked about the relationship with the universe level as sort of being, I don't know if it's the highest level, but it's a pretty powerful level. And that's why I feel like I do have an abundance, and I don't really want to go to the bottom level of trying to create financial abundance, because yeah. So I'm going on a journey, and we'll see how things go. And I feel at some point I can get outside that electric fence, and then the electric fence of thought can't touch me. It can't trick me. It's a trick